Ever get that feeling? Like you're drowning in information, but you're still thirsty for like actual understanding.
Yeah.
Well, today, we're going to try something different, a different kind of deep dive. We're not just skimming the surface, we're going deep.
Right.
Extracting those core insights from some really fascinating foundational work.
Yeah, exactly. We're all about giving you that shortcut to genuine knowledge. Like, forget the information overload.
Right.
We're diving straight into the heart of it all. And today, that's the world of logic.
A world of logic.
Specifically, the work of Gottlob Frege.
Oh, Gottlob Frege.
A name that might not be a household name, but trust me, this guy's ideas, they're still shaping how we think today. And our source for this deep dive, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on Frege's logic.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. Frege, logic. Is this going to be like a dry, dusty philosophy lecture?
Yeah.
But stick with us. I promise you, this is anything but.
Right. Our mission here isn't about memorizing names and dates. We're going deeper.
Much deeper.
We're after the philosophical bedrock. Like, how do we even think about logic? About language?
Yeah, exactly. We're chasing those aha moments.
Yeah.
Where complex ideas suddenly make sense.
Exactly.
So get ready. Because we're about to explore Frege's key logical breakthroughs, how his thinking evolved, and most importantly, why it all still matters today for understanding, how we reason, how we communicate.
And it might sound a little technical, but don't worry, we're your guides.
We'll navigate the jargon, highlight the really fascinating parts.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at things like Frege's rejection of the traditional way of analyzing sentences.
Right. Subject and predicate out the window.
Out the window. Then there's his early struggle with the concept of identity and the fascinating differences between his two big systems of logic.
His two systems.
The Begriffsschrift and the Grundgesetze.
Okay. Two systems. So right off the bat, things are getting interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
Before we even jump in, let's set the stage.
Yeah.
How significant was Frege, really?
Okay, imagine the world of logic before Frege. It's like a landscape waiting to be discovered. And then Frege comes along and he invents this thing called modern quantificational logic.
Okay.
And his early work, the Begriffsschrift, that's where he lays the foundation for this revolution.
Begriffsschrift. I was just listening that word.
It's a good one.
Concept script.
Yeah, or something like that. But of course,
perfect.
no intellectual giant works in a vacuum.
Right. Were there other folks working on similar ideas at the time?
Oh, absolutely. You had figures like Boole, De Morgan, Schroeder, Peirce, and Venn as well, all making important contributions.
Okay, so a whole bunch of brilliant minds buzzing around. But Frege's work really had staying power, didn't it?
His influence was huge, especially through later figures like Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein. They championed his ideas, built upon them, and through them, Frege's work truly shaped the landscape of logic for generations.
Okay, so we've got these two big works, the Begriffsschrift from 1879, and then the Grundgesetze der Arithmetik, published a bit later, in two parts, 1893 and 1903.
Right.
So was the second one basically just like Frege's director's cut, like Begriffsschrift, the expanded edition?
Well, the story you often hear is about Frege's logicist project, his ambition to show that all of math, all of it, could be built from pure logic. And the way that story usually goes, the Begriffsschrift sets up the basic logical framework.
Okay.
And then the Grundgesetze is where he really tries to flesh that out, like actually do the hard work of deriving all those mathematical truths.
Right, right. But our focus today is a little different, right?
Yeah.
We're not here to judge the success or failure of this whole logicist project. We're more interested in Frege's philosophy of logic.
Exactly.
Like, what were his fundamental insights? How did he see logic working at its core?
That's what we're after. And that's where it gets really fascinating because, you see, there's this common idea that Frege had this one single system of logic.
Right.
That he just kind of expanded over time. But the truth is, the logic in the Grundgesetze, it's significantly different from what he presented in the Begriffsschrift.
Wait, really?
Oh, yeah. It wasn't just like a simple upgrade.
Right.
These were substantial differences, both in the technical nitty-gritty and in the dupper philosophical interpretations.
So we're not dealing with just one consistently evolving system. It's more like two distinct, though related approaches.
Exactly.
And you said some things that could be proven in Begriffsschrift couldn't even be proven in Grundgesetze.
That's right. So to really understand Frege, we need to look at each system in its own right, on its own terms, with its own weird and wonderful notation.
Okay, let's do it. Let's step into that first laboratory. The logic of Begriffsschrift. Now, this comes before Frege's really famous essays.
It does.
Like sense and reference and concept and object, right?
Those came later.
So at this point, Frege is not working with that clear center-reference distinction. What did he have instead?
He was operating with the notion of conceptual content. It's kind of doing the work that sense and reference would later do, but all rolled into one.
Conceptual content. Okay. Break that down for me. How did that work in his early logic?
Well, Frege argued that his Begriffsschrift logic, it was designed to be insensitive to differences between judgments.
Okay.
If those judgments express the same underlying conceptual content.
Yeah.
Even if, like, the way they expressed it was different.
Okay, I'm going to need an example.
Sure. So Frege uses this classic example. The sentence is, at Plataea, the Greeks defeated the Persians.
Okay.
And at Plataea, the Persians were defeated by the Greeks.
Okay, yeah. Different grammar, but...
Right, different structure, different perspective.
Right.
In his later work, he'd say they have different senses.
Okay.
But the core information, the actual event, that's the same.
Right.
And that's the conceptual content.
Right.
And for Begriffsschrift, that's what mattered. If two judgments shared that content, then for logical purposes, they were the same.
Interesting. So early Frege, he's really focused on that objective information.
Yeah.
Less concerned with the nuances of language.
Exactly. And this really sets the stage for a logic that's all about truth preservation, regardless of how you express things.
Okay. So in the Begriffsschrift, those logical operators, negation, conjunction, all that, they're acting on these judgeable contents, like possible facts or circumstances.
Exactly. So you take negation, for example. It takes a judgeable content and spits out another one. The negation of the first.
Okay.
Same with his early version of the universal quantifier. It operates on these things he calls predicative conceptual contents and outpops a judgeable content.
I can already see this leading to some like deep philosophical rabbit holes. Like what is a negative fact really?
Right.
Or a universal one?
Yeah. It definitely raises those questions. And Frege doesn't really dive into them too deeply in Begriffsschrift.
Okay.
Interestingly, some of these issues, they actually get resolved or at least treated differently in Grundgesetze, once he has that sense-reference distinction.
Right.
But for now, the key takeaway is this. This focus on conceptual content means that the operators in Begriffsschrift are more restricted than their counterparts in Grundgesetze.
Okay. Begriffsschrift logic, conceptual content. What else was revolutionary about it? I know Frege, he really went against the grain of traditional Aristotelian logic.
Oh, he did. Big time. Right in Section 3 of Begriffsschrift, Frege just comes out and says, nope, I'm rejecting the whole subject-predicate analysis of propositions.
Whoa, okay, hold on. Subject and predicate, that's like Logic 101. That's been the dominant framework for like centuries.
Yeah, going all the way back to Aristotle.
So what was Frege's beef with it? Why throw it out?
Well, he basically says it's too limiting.
Okay.
That it doesn't really capture the complex ways that concepts can relate to each other.
Okay, so subject predicate is out. What does he give us instead?
He introduces the function argument analysis.
Function argument.
Yeah. So instead of this fixed subject and predicate, Frege says, look, a proposition can be analyzed into a function and its argument.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. It can be done in multiple ways, depending on how you're looking at the content.
Multiple ways. Okay, so give me the like Logic 101 version of functions and arguments.
Sure. So think of an object as like a complete thing, like a filled container. A function is more like a recipe with a missing ingredient. It needs something to fill that gap.
Right, the argument.
Exactly. The argument completes the function, and the function does something with the argument.
Okay. And this gives him more flexibility.
Tons of it. It allows him to see logical structure in a much more nuanced way.
Okay.
So let's take an example.
Hit me with it.
Hydrogen is lighter than carbon dioxide.
Okay. Classic chemistry example.
Right. So traditionally, hydrogen would be the subject, is lighter than carbon dioxide is the predicate. But Frege says, hold on.
Okay.
We could also see hydrogen as the argument and being lighter than carbon dioxide as the function.
Okay, flipping it around.
Yeah. Or we could make carbon dioxide the argument and being heavier than hydrogen the function. Same information, same conceptual content, just different ways of slicing it.
Right, different emphasis, different perspective.
Exactly. And this wasn't just about notation, it reflected a totally different way of thinking about the structure of logic.
Okay, so a more adaptable, more flexible framework. And he even gave a formal definition for this function-argument relationship, right?
He did. He said basically, if you have an expression and some part of it appears in one or more places, and you can imagine replacing those parts, then the unchanging part is the function, and the replaceable part is the argument.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But you said earlier that this isn't the same as the type theory he'd later develop in Grundgesetze.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. In Begriffsschrift, Frege hadn't yet come up with this strict hierarchy of types, like objects and then functions that take objects and then functions that take those functions and so on.
Okay. So at this point, it's a bit more free-flowing.
Exactly. What might look like different kinds of variables in Begriffsschrift weren't really representing those rigid levels.
Okay. So in Begriffsschrift, what seems like a first-order variable is really ranging over arguments of any level.
Right. Including things that later on he'd classify as functions. And same with the apparent second-order variables. They were ranging over functions that could take those arguments.
So it's less about a fundamental difference between entities and more about how we choose to view them, right?
Precisely. And Frege himself says that the different ways we can analyze the same content as a function of this or that argument, it doesn't change the underlying content as long as the function and argument are clear.
Right.
So the distinction isn't grounded in some objective hierarchy of being, at least not yet.
Okay. That clears up a lot.
Yeah.
So those different styles of variables he uses in Begriffsschrift, the German and Roman letters, they weren't tied to a strict type theory yet.
Not at this point. He was using them more like a guide for the reader to show the scope and connections within complex formulas. It wasn't about a deep ontological division between, like, fundamentally different kinds of things.
Got it. So we've got the basic logic of Begriffsschrift down. Now let's get into the specifics.
Okay.
What are the logical operators he's working with? First up, the judgment stroke. What's that all about?
The judgment stroke. Man, that little symbol has caused so much debate, so much philosophical head-scratching.
Right.
In both Begriffsschrift and Grundgesetze.
Okay.
But in Begriffsschrift, its main job was to take a judgeable content, a proposition that could be true or false, and turn it into an actual assertion, a claim that it's true.
Okay, so without the judgment stroke, it's just a potential proposition.
Right, just an idea. You're not committing to its truth.
Okay.
Frege gives this example. Opposite magnetic poles attract one another.
Okay.
With the judgment stroke, it's a statement of fact. You're asserting it. Without it, it's just a complex of ideas.
Okay.
Something you might consider, maybe as a premise, but you're not saying it's definitely true. He even suggests that you could paraphrase the content without the stroke, like the circumstance that, or the proposition that.
Interesting.
And of course, not just any idea could get the judgment stroke. It had to be something that could be judged as true or false in the first place. A judgeable content.
Right, right. So aus. You can't just slap a judgment stroke on that.
Exactly. For Frege, his Begriffsschrift was a language with one special predicate, one that applied to all judgments, is a fact. And that's what the judgment stroke symbolized.
Okay. Now, he mentions this horizontal stroke as part of the judgment stroke. What was that doing in Begriffsschrift?
So the horizontal stroke, he describes it as this thing that binds symbols together, creates a unified content from whatever comes after it. And then the judgment stroke, the vertical one, applies to that whole bound content.
Okay.
He calls the horizontal stroke the content stroke, emphasizing that what follows it has to be something that can be judged.
Okay.
But in Begriffsschrift, the horizontal stroke doesn't really work on its own. It always shows up with either the judgment strokes, the negation stroke, or the conditional stroke.
Got it. So judgment stroke, marking an assertion. What about the conditional stroke? That sounds like his way of doing if-then statements.
That's exactly it. He explains it by looking at all the possibilities. You have two judgeable contents, A and B.
Right.
Each can be affirmed or denied, so 4 possibilities total. And his conditional stroke, it's basically saying the third possibility, A is true, but B is false. That doesn't hold. The other 3 are fine.
Okay, so just like the material conditional in like basic logic, it's only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false.
Exactly. And in his notation, the consequent goes above the antecedent, kind of visually reinforces the idea of if this, then that.
Right, interesting. And he was already noticing how these conditional structures could be analyzed in different ways.
Yeah, which becomes really important for his rules of inference later on.
Okay, conditional stroke, checked. Next, the negation stroke. I'm guessing this is a pretty straightforward knot.
Pretty much. It's this little vertical stroke that gets attached below the content stroke, and it means the content does not obtain. It's his way of representing not A.
Straightforward enough. And you said that with just the conditional and the negation, he could actually express all the basic logical connectives, like or and.
That's right. He doesn't actually give a formal proof for that in Begriffsschrift,
Okay.
but he does point out that, yeah, you can get inclusive or, exclusive or, and, just by combining negation and the conditional in the right ways.
Okay. Showing, not just telling.
Mm.
Classic Frege. Now, the identity operator in Begriffsschrift.
Yeah.
You said this one caused him some trouble.
Oh, yeah. This is where we see him wrestling with some deep philosophical questions.
Right.
And remember, this is before he had the sensor-reference distinction worked out.
Right.
So he's trying to figure out how identity statements like A, and A, B could have different cognitive value. Like, how could one be more informative than the other, especially if the content of a name was just the object it referred to?
Right. Because if A and B both refer to the same thing, then saying A is identical to A should be the same as saying A is identical to B.
Exactly. But intuitively, they don't seem to be saying the same thing.
Right.
So Frege, he's thinking, okay, maybe in identity claims, the content of a name isn't the object itself, but the name itself.
Oh, the name refers to itself.
Yeah, it's a bit of a head spinner. He defines AIB using his Begriffsschrift notation to mean that the symbol A and the symbol B have the same content, so they can be swapped out without changing the truth.
Okay. So in these identity statements, names become self-referential.
In a way, yeah, it was kind of a temporary solution. He admitted later that this leads to a weird situation where every symbol has this double meaning.
Right.
In some contexts, it stands for its usual content. But in identity claims, it stands for itself. He knew it wasn't perfect, but it was the best he could do before he had the sensor-reference distinction.
Okay. A necessary philosophical detour. And just to clarify, this identity operator in Begriffsschrift, it wasn't just about objects in the world.
No, he could apply it to anything, really, as long as the result was a judgeable content.
Okay. So, not restricted to physical objects or anything like that. Moving on, let's talk about how Frege expressed generality in Begriffsschrift. I know there's this thing called the concavity. It sounds a bit geometrical.
It is, yeah. So the concavity, it's this curved line in his notation, usually paired with a Gothic letter.
Okay.
And it's his way of representing universal quantification. Basically saying, for all. He explained it like this. You take a function, and you substitute a Gothic letter for an argument.
Right.
Then you put a concavity containing that letter in the content stroke. And that whole thing, it means the function is true no matter what you plug in for that argument.
Okay. So it's asserting that some property holds universally.
Not quite universally in the modern sense. There's a catch. Frege restricted it so that you could only use the concavity with functions that would still result in a judgeable content.
Okay.
So you couldn't just quantify over anything and apply any function you wanted. And the scope of this for all, it was determined by the concavity itself. The Gothic letter inside it, its scope extended over everything that came after it.
Okay.
And another key point. This quantification wasn't over specific types of things, like objects or properties. It was over anything that, when combined with the function, gave you a judgeable content. So it's different from how we think about quantifiers today.
Right. Our modern for all is a bit more specific. We have first order, second order, and so on.
Exactly. And Frege even points out that the roles of function and argument, they can be switched around within this framework.
Interesting. So the Begriffsschrift quantifier, it's this single flexible tool that operates on both objects and functions, depending on the context. Now, what about those Roman letters he used? You said those work differently.
Yeah, in Begriffsschrift, Roman letters were basically just shorthand, like an abbreviation, for a concavity with a Gothic letter right after the judgment stroke.
Got it. So when he uses a Roman letter, it's like he's already built in the for all.
Exactly. And he's explicit about this. He says, a Roman letter, it always has the whole judgment within its scope. No need for an extra concavity to show that.
Okay. So a notational shortcut for a specific kind of universal quantification.
Right. But even though that was his official explanation, Frege often treated formulas with Roman letters like they were substitution instances.
Okay.
As if the Roman letters were picking out specific functions and arguments. It was probably out of necessity, since Begriffsschrift didn't have a way to directly express claims about individuals.
Interesting. Okay. Operators and Begriffsschrift covered. Now let's get to the underlying system itself. The axioms and rules of inference. How many axioms did he have?
9 axioms.
9. That's a lot to start with. And one main rule of inference, plus 2 more that he used informally. Okay, walk me through those axioms. Were they all supposed to be, like, self-evident truths of logic.
That was the idea. So axioms 1 and 2, they were about basic conditional reasoning, like setting up the foundation for if-then statements.
Mhm.
Axiom 3, that let you rearrange the antecedents within a conditional. And axiom 4 was about contraposition. If A, then B, then if not B, then not A.
Right, right. Classic logic stuff.
Yeah, but those last two, they'd actually be replaced by more general rules in Grundgesetze.
Okay. And he had axioms about negation, too.
Yeah. Axioms 5 and 6 were basically double negation, introduction, and elimination. Like, not A is equivalent to A. And later on, he'd realize those two could be combined into one simpler principle.
Elegant.
And there's actually another thing. Turns out axiom 3 was kind of redundant. You could derive it from the other axioms and the main rule of inference. It's amazing how later logicians can find those little hidden gems.
Yeah. Even Frege, brilliant as he was, could miss a few things.
Yeah.
Okay, what about the rest of the axioms?
Axiom 7, that was about the indiscernibility of identicals. If two things are identical, they have all the same properties. Axiom 8 was about self-identity. A is identical to A. And again, these were supposed to apply to anything, not just physical objects. And lastly, Axiom 9 dealt with the connection between the concavity, his universal quantifier, and those Roman letters. But he only gave what we'd now call a first-order version of it. No separate second-order version like he'd have later.
Right, right. Okay, axioms laid out. What about the rule of inference? The engine that drives the whole system. You said there was only one main one, officially?
Yeah, Frege was very proud of this. He says in the preface to Begriffsschrift, look, I'm only using one rule of inference, and that rule was modus ponens.
Modus ponens. The good old if P, then Q, and P, therefore Q.
That's the one. But his version was a bit trickier than the basic one we learn in intro logic.
Okay, how so?
Well, remember those Roman letters? In Begriffsschrift, they're standing in for quantifiers over judgeable contents. So his modus ponens, it's actually working as a kind of blueprint for an infinite number of specific rules, each dealing with quantified statements. And the way he justified the rule, it was actually pretty limited, didn't really cover the full range of how he was using it.
Ah, so not so straightforward after all.
Not really. Now, you also asked about those two informal rules he used.
Right, right.
Those were concavity introduction and a rule of substitution. Concavity introduction, that let you switch between a Roman letter and a Gothic letter with a concavity. It wasn't really introducing a new quantifier, since the Roman letter already stood for one, but it made it explicit in the notation. And substitution, that allowed you to take a proven formula and substitute different things for the Roman letters.
Okay.
But there's been some debate about whether all of Frege's uses of substitution were actually valid. Some think it could lead to some sneaky, incorrect derivations.
Interesting. So even in this early system, there might have been some cracks in the foundation.
Maybe.
What about definitions? How did he handle bringing in new terms in Begriffsschrift?
He used this special symbol called the definition stroke, basically a double judgment stroke with a horizontal bar. And definitions in Begriffsschrift, they didn't just assert that two expressions were equal. They said that the definiens, the defining expression, and the definendum, the term being defined, they had the same conceptual content.
Okay. So really strong claim of sameness.
Yeah. And this is another thing that would change later in Grundgesetze.
Right, right. All right. Begriffsschrift thoroughly explored. Time to move on to the main event, the logic of Grundgesetze. You mentioned some big shifts right from the get-go. Like, what were some of those fundamental changes?
Well, Grundgesetze is where we see Frege's thinking really mature. One of the biggest changes was the introduction of a full-fledged type theory. He now has this clear distinction between things that are saturated objects and things that are unsaturated functions.
Saturated versus unsaturated. Okay, I like that. So objects, they're complete in themselves. Functions, they need something else, an argument, to be complete.
Exactly. And within the realm of functions, he distinguishes between concepts and relations. Concepts are functions that take one argument and spit out a truth value, true or false. Relations are functions that take multiple arguments and do the same thing.
Okay, so concepts are like properties, and relations are like relationships.
Pretty much. Like, is red would be a concept, is taller than would be a relation.
Absolutely right. Makes sense. And this type system, it went even further, right? Different levels of functions depending on what kind of arguments they took.
Yeah. First-level functions take objects as arguments. Second-level functions take first-level functions as arguments, and so on. This hierarchy, it was a big departure from the more unified view in Begriffsschrift.
Okay. So how did all these new distinctions affect those old operators that he brought over from Begriffsschrift? Like, what happened to the judgment stroke in Grundgesetze?
The judgment stroke, it went through a big transformation. It no longer applies to expressions that name facts or states of affairs.
No.
Instead, it attaches to expressions that name objects, specifically the truth values themselves.
So instead of asserting a proposition, it's asserting the truth of a statement that refers to a truth value.
Exactly. It's a subtle change, but it really reflects a shift in how Frege was thinking about logic and assertion.
Yeah, very subtle but important. Okay, what about the horizontal stroke?
The horizontal stroke, it gets promoted to a full-fledged independent function symbol.
Go.
And it always outputs a truth value. If you apply it to a truth value name, it gives you back that same truth value. But if you apply it to something else, like a number, it gives you the false.
Okay, so the horizontal stroke, it's like a truth value detector.
Kind of, yeah. And importantly, unlike in Begriffsschrift, you can apply it to any proper name, not just judgeable contents.
Interesting. So you could end up with grammatically correct but logically false statements. Like if you applied the judgment stroke to the result of applying the horizontal stroke to the name of, say, the number 2.
Exactly. Frege was committed to this idea that functions should be defined for all possible arguments. So the horizontal stroke had to work even for things that weren't truth values. And in those cases, it consistently spits out the false. And since the judgment stroke only works on truth value names, you can technically apply it to any name by first using the horizontal stroke.
Okay, so it's all about making sure those functions are well defined. Gotcha. What about the negation stroke? How that change in Grundgesetze?
Negation also became a full-fledged function symbol. It takes any proper name as input and outputs a truth value name.
Okay.
So negation of the true gives you the false. Negation of the false gives you the true. But here's the interesting part. If you apply it to a name that doesn't refer to a truth value, it gives you the true.
Hold on. So negation of 5 is true.
Yep. Frege himself points this out. In Grundgesetze, the expression to, with the judgment stroke, is a perfectly valid, though false, judgment. It's a consequence of defining negation as a total function that has to have an output for every input.
Right. So negation of falsehood is truth. Negation of truth is falsehood. But negation of, like a random number, is also truth.
That's right. It's weird, I know. But it's all about maintaining that rigor within his system.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. Total functions, defined for everything. What about the conditional stroke in Grundgesetze?
That became a 2.